The Burros of Berea is a conversational podcast. We study the Bible and we talk about it.
Not all of us are of the same faith, and one of us doesn't actually have a faith.
And that's wonderful. We all love one another, and we're going to continue to talk about these things.
The things we believe in and the things we believe about what we read in the Bible. Not all of these are necessarily true. Some of it is opinion and speculation. Thank you for
listening and speculating with us.
There you go. That was good. Yes.
You are listening to the Burros of Berea.
Well, welcome back to the Burros of Berea. I am Rick Welch, and to my right is Cherry the Annihilator Lewis.
Hello.
Sarita the Rita Edgerton.
Hola, mis amigos.
Where did you say you were from?
South Carolina.
Spartanburg.
That's where I live. That's not where I'm from.
Spartanburg. Yeah,
he gets it.
This is Spartanburg.
Yeah,
hey, Brian got it. He didn't even know. He
got it right away.
He has no idea we've done that. Behind the glass, Rocket Man Andy Bishop.
Hello.
Straight out of Compton, Ralph Hicks.
Represent.
And Billy Eye Candy Kimsey.
Sometimes you feel like a nut. Sometimes you don't.
He didn't do his rocket sound.
I know. Sarita gave me a look.
It's the first time.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, Blue Moon, I leave it off just to spice things up.
Man, I've got a great joke for sometimes you feel like a nut, but I will not do it. I can't.
I thought you were going to be a high chew.
A high chew? Yeah.
I don't know what a high chew is.
He's going to do some research.
Oh, Henry.
Yeah.
Well, I want to get into this, guys. We have a very, very awesome guest. I actually have spoke with him. I didn't speak with him, but we've emailed back and forth a couple of months ago. We've kept this going, and I'm so glad that he's on the show. A very prolific author, screenwriter of Hollywood films and some Christian films. And we'll get into the books later, but author Brian Godawa is here. Brian, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks. And I'm from Texas. Freedom!
Are you in Texas right now?
Yeah.
Is that where Mel Gibson's from?
Okay, I just realized what that was a joke hailing back to, what's that movie?
Braveheart?
Braveheart,
yeah.
Yes. You're down there with Joe Rogan and them guys, Tony Hinchcliffe and all that.
Yeah, he's down south, but I'm up near Dallas. But I just moved out here about a year and a half ago over in 2020. And I lived in Southern California for 30 years. So that's why I yell freedom.
He was one of the U-Hauls that came out but never went back.
Yeah. That's
yeah,
right.
actually, we couldn't get it. We wouldn't be able to get a U-Haul because they were all booked up. But it was a good thing anyway because we lived in a condo only anyway, and we didn't have much stuff, so we gave all of it away and or sold some of it, And we just drove in our 2 cars out to Texas, and of course, with the sale of a condo in Los Angeles, you could buy a completely new home in Texas.
Wow,
a ranch almost.
Really?
That is a true statement.
Well, when I said prolific author, can you give us an idea? Like, how many books have you actually written, like number-wise?
Lots.
You don't even know how many?
I don't know, like 23 or
it's
something
a
like
lot.
that.
Wow. Yeah, I sent it to the guys today. We looked you up on Wikipedia. We looked you up on your website, Godawa.com. And then I sent things from IMDb and from YouTube and you name it. And you're all over the place, like your books. And we're going to get into this a little bit because I want to hear your testimony. But the Chronicles of Nephilim book series, man, that looks awesome. And then, guys, Brian, what I would like to ask you before we get into this, even after your testimony, I'm still going to like you when you're done. And so I'd like to put a link on our website to get people to where your books are. Because, guys, these are incredible. The spiritual world of ancient China and the Bible, the spiritual world of Jezebel and Elijah, Watchers, the Nephilim, and the cosmic war of the seed, when giants were upon the earth. I mean, I love that stuff. Remember when we talked about all that stuff, Andy?
I read some things like that in a different genre, but I was like, wow, this is interesting. And I like his spoofs too. I watched all his spoofs. They're pretty funny.
Yeah. I haven't seen those yet.
Yeah, there's some they're like little skits or little 5-minute short films, and they're on my website. Yeah, my website's just my name, Godawa.com.
Yeah, there's a lot of information. Hey, Rick, are we doing any of his books? I know you said we're going to be doing a lot of reading of books for audiobooks. Are we doing any of his?
No, well, I'm so glad you brought that up, and maybe we could talk to Brian about that. Brian, do you have audiobooks?
I do. I do.
Very good.
Almost all of my books are in audio as well as paperback and ebook, and it's all on Amazon. But what do you guys do with this book reading thing?
Oh, it's just something that the Burrows are getting into, and we'll do a shameless plug for that. We're actually going to begin doing audiobooks for a couple of organizations that have, for instance, we're going to be doing some of Chilton's work, Days of Vengeance, and The Great Tribulation and Paradise Restored, I think it is. And then,
man.
Yep, we're some DeMar works and Gentry. So we're getting into some stuff. I'm excited. So all of these non-preterists are going to be reading these preterist books. I'm so excited about it. It's great.
Hey, listen, okay, this will be my self-promotion moment here, is that
Do it.
If you really if you're not preterist, that's cool. If you want, there are different ways of doing it. Like, I know that if you're like me, of course you want to do the in-depth, exhaustive Bible study. I need that for myself. But if you want a good introduction in a way, or an entertaining expression of it, my novel series, Chronicles of the Apocalypse, is 4 novels, and I basically tell the first century story when John's writing the book of Revelation and Nero's persecuting the Christians and all that. And I have a supernatural angle with angels and demons and stuff. And I basically tell the origin story of the book of Revelation. But as a preterist, of course, I consider it to be fulfilled in that first century. So I try to show how the Jews might have understood it in their world at that time. And it's a very entertaining, big, epic romance, angels, demons, all kinds of cool stuff. And I think it's a great way to introduce people into, and I say that not because it's simplistic, but because I actually think dramatization or narrative is sometimes more powerful of communicating theology than like systematic theology or something like that. And of course, Jesus agrees with me, so that's good.
Well, most people didn't learn the Bible by reading it anyway. Somebody got up on podium and did it for them. But I like how you said that, talking about how the Jews may have understood it in their time, because all of my life I've wondered about translations and different things about how do we know how they thought it was, and how do they know the meaning of this word and everything. So I like that you said that and you wrote it that way.
Yeah, I'm just curious how you were able to get John into the Neronic persecution when he was actually during Domitian's. And that's a joke, Brian. I'm just playing. I know. If nobody knows what we're talking about, it's about AD 96 to AD 66. And that's the thing. Revelation, the late date versus the early date. And so he said Neronic, and so it was a pick on him. Only preterists know this. So for us 4 total in our total listening audience that got the joke. So anyway,
the neurotics being neuronic.
So Brian, every single guest that I have on the show, I ask them the same question. Okay, the very first question: can you tell me the earliest memory that you have of when you heard the name Jesus Christ?
Oh, wow!
I know, right?
Well, I was raised in a Roman Catholic church, so I did hear his name as a young child. Probably, 9 or 10. I could, but honestly, I don't remember. I mean, I don't necessarily remember hearing that, but I mean, I went through my first communion and all that, so that must have been when I did. But in terms of when I guess that would be it.
So you were raised Roman Catholic. We hear that a lot on here, don't we, guys? Mm-hmm. A lot of the testimonies, people were in the Roman Catholic Church and they heard Jesus as a child, and then they would have some sort of a conversion outside of the Catholic Church.
Well, look at the age group, 40 and 50 and above. And that was really big back then.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm in that old style generation. The oldsters.
Old style. Well, tell us. I'm very curious to hear your salvation story, and what we want to do is just you take it away. You tell us, where just your life story and how you came to be saved and how you got to where you are today.
Well, I was born a Christian. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Well, you were the second time.
Yeah, born again. No, seriously. So yeah, I was raised in Illinois, and to, like I said, a Catholic family, and I'm an artist, and I've always been an artist, and I think that gives me a certain sensibility of, and a sensitivity actually to some things that other people don't think as much about. I mean, I do. It's funny. I do actually. My early memories of death actually were I remember in high school where, I've been raised as a Catholic, but God was not real to my family. And they would even tell you that now too, because they all eventually did become Christians as well. But it was a religion, and it was for them, for us, it was a religion. And we just, went through the rote and the rituals and all that stuff, but we didn't really have a personal connection to God in any way. And not only that, but I kind of felt like, if there's God, how come he's so distant, or how come he doesn't show himself, type of thing, like, where is he? I don't really have a sense of him anywhere, you've got to just believe this stuff. Well, when I was in high school and pursuing my art, and my personal goal was to be, I want to be a great artist, because I always wanted to have a sense of significance in this world. And I thought, well, if I became a famous artist like Michelangelo, who was my hero, then, I could have an influence on history in some way, and people might be studying my work, long after I was gone even. That was how I thought I would have a sense of significance or legacy. And so it really, it was a sense of fame, and that's what I thought would give me that purpose and that meaning. But around that same time, but also, like I said, as an artist, I've also had a sort of a constant sort of awareness of death, and just really thinking about death a lot, and not in a suicidal way, but just thinking about the reality of death. And man, it could all be over in a second, and our whole life is gone and over. And what's going to happen to us when we die, and what's the meaning and purpose of our life, that kind of thing. I used to think about that a lot. And one of my fellow artist friends in my class actually did commit suicide. And of course, I didn't understand the nature of depression at that time or anything. It was just shocking and bizarre, but it really did. It made me think a lot, about the meaning and purpose of life. And so, around that time, interestingly,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I ask you around what age you are at this point?
Yeah, so I would say I'm about 15, 16 probably.
Okay.
Roughly. Yeah, so, roughly 16 when this stuff started coming together. And so I'm like a sophomore or junior in high school. And,
okay. Thank you.
And I had already done the communion thing, but it wasn't real to me. So, I had no faith. And so, but that started making me think a lot about death. And I remember even to this day thinking, man, death is like forever. Like when you're dead, you're gone. And if I looked at the timeline of history, and you could see like, who knows how far back and how far forward history goes. But there I am, a little dot, a little blip on the timeline of history. Very insignificant. And it really made me think about, I'm going to be dead a lot longer than I am alive. And that was serious stuff. And it made me concerned. And so around that time, though, this kid, this another Christian guy befriended me, and he invited me to this Christian youth group. And interestingly, this was many, many years ago in the 70s. So this church was one of the first churches ever that did, they had like this high school group during the weeknights where you'd go and play games, and then they would play rock music. Mm-hmm. And then they'd have a speaker go up there, and he'd speak really relevant to my life, which is very different from the religious church I'd been going to. It made sense, And I went to that for a while, actually. And they had drama. They did drama. Now, this was the first that had ever done that. In fact, the church was, dare I say its name, Willow Creek.
What is it?
Willow Creek, Sun City.
Oh.
And now God knows what kind of woke abomination they've become. But at the time though, it was simple, and it broke through the religion that
Were they part of that Jesus movement? Do you remember the Jesus movement? No? Okay.
No, not at all. They started right around that time in the late 70s. So I got in there pretty early. But so, anyway, my conversion story is not an emotional one. I was basically, by worldly standards, I was a good kid. I didn't do drugs. I didn't even have sex, and I wanted to, but I wasn't I wasn't a popular kid or anything like that. So, I just did my thing. I did my sport and I did my art and all that. And, but what happened to me was it was more of just a dawning where I do remember the day when I went to one of these Sun City groups and the message finally hit home to me in a way that made me realize I really there's a reason why I feel like God's not around, because I'm cut off from him. And it's my sin. And that sin, causes a separation between me and my creator. And that's, of course, why Jesus died. His death was to pay the penalty for my sin, take my place. Kind of like I love the analogy of the murderer who's in court of law and the judge declares him guilty. And then he gets off the bench and says, I'm going to pay the price for you, that kind of concept. And that made a lot of sense to me. And so I've always been a person who's been interested in the truth. And of course, that's my pursuit in art as well. I want to communicate truth. I want to discover truth. And so the truth of it just hit me. Again, no big emotional thing. It was just, this is truth. And I've got to come back in a relationship with God. And I've got to, commit my life to Jesus Christ in some way. So I called my friend who had been inviting me, and I remember sitting there on the curb after the thing, and I'm praying to just give my life to Jesus and follow him and become his disciple. And in the same sense, I didn't feel any big dramatic change. I didn't have a lot to repent from in that sense. But of course, when the Holy Spirit came in me, which I now look back and you can see, oh, that was the Holy Spirit, I suddenly started to become aware of the things in my life that, whether it's my bad language or my hateful thoughts about people, all those things started becoming real to me. And I started realizing, in a way, if I were to compare myself to God's 10 commandments, so to speak, not so to speak, literally, I've broken all of them, if at least in my heart, if not literally, lying, cheating, stealing, committing adultery in my heart, that kind of thing, and hating people, wanting them to be dead or whatever. And so in other words, I started seeing the reality of pride in my life. And that pride is, in that sense, as C.S. Lewis talked about, that is the highest sin of all. And that's what I began to realize, was that I was the chief of all sinners. It just wasn't obvious to other people, but I just got that sense of my true sinful self. But of course, learning more over the next couple of years about the grace of God and how that operates and his forgiveness, and life is a pursuit of sanctification, and so I went to college, and it was.
So this is before college. So
yeah,
what you were talking about, this sense of sin, like all of the other people that I've talked to, especially like Ralph, who come from a Roman Catholic background, usually have a very good understanding of being the chief of sinners in their life. Like they already know that. So for you,
you
we've really didn't
covered.
Yeah, he said guilt was covered, but but for you at this point, like you recognized the holiness more so, and
after the fact almost. I mean, I was realizing I was a sinner and I needed Jesus, but yeah, it was the biggest delusion of all for people to think you're a good person. I mean, that's the biggest delusion, that I was just as bad as any of these other people. They just didn't realize what was in my heart. So,
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so
but
then
at the same time, the grace of God.
Yeah, sorry to have interrupted you. So then now you're in college. You're going to college.
Yeah, so I go to college, and it's not, that church was not very strong on discipling. It was pretty evangelistic. But it wasn't until I went to college and met a brother in the Lord, and that's when I first became discipled, and I started to grow in Christ in that sense. And, that, by the way, that conversion then gave me a new purpose in life. And rather than thinking that, before I was a Christian, that realization of death was the crusher of my desire for fame, because I also realized at the same time, well, when I'm dead, I don't know where I was going to be, but I'm going to be disconnected from this world. I'm not going to receive anything. I'm not going to know about anything that's going on about me, or worshiping my art, or whatever, studying my art and all that stuff. So in other words, it wouldn't matter what kind of accomplishments I did on the earth. When I was dead and gone, it wouldn't do me any good, And it's sort of, that's what I love about the existentialists, is that there really is that keen awareness of the angst, the dread the meaninglessness of life and how death brings you to that. That's why it's one of the most important themes in a lot of my stories. Death brings you to that realization of your lack of meaning and purpose. And so then when I came to know Christ, I started learning and growing. And interestingly, though, I had a hard time understanding how my art and my faith worked together until I read a book, all the books of Francis Schaeffer. He's
Yes.
I don't know if he's known that much
yeah,
anymore.
I'm very familiar with him.
Yeah, he was like the only guy who wrote about the arts at all back then. And I read it, and it opened my eyes, and I began to understand how my art reflects a worldview and how it's all integrated, and how to pursue that meaning in art without having the propaganda nature that so much of bad Christian art has today. And that was really transforming in my life. And I had also become just in love with apologetics for many years, and even to this day, I love apologetics, and I've studied. But that apologetics affected my life in a good way and in a bad way. And what it did was I began to understand things through the lens of apologetics and doctrinal truth and such. And of course, like I said, I'm a truth-focused person, so that makes sense why I'm drawn to that. But I would say that over the years, that it had a twofold effect. One was sort of, allowing me to see the logos of God, the rationality of God. But at the same time, it also started to almost put a wedge between the imagination and the mind and my imagination. Some people would say the heart, like a charismatic might say, oh, the heart and the mind. But I'm not like that. I'm not that kind of person. To me, it's imagination and the mind and reason. And I was almost like living a double life where I'm this artistic person, but I'm also doing all this hyper rationalistic stuff. And I think that it created a hyper rationalization in my life that I think ultimately over the 20 or 30 years after that, it started to affect me in some negative ways where, I would tend to see God as a worldview or as a philosophy rather than the person. And it's not that I didn't have the personal relationship. I'm just saying that that when you stress one thing, you have to really be open to being aware of how that one thing can make you myopic and miss other things. But because of my art, thankfully, after many, many years, I started to. I also had kind of a change of understanding, and I started to understand how my imagination, not just my intellect, could interact with God, but also my imagination in theology and in faith, because it always was difficult to see how those two would work together. Because an overemphasis on rationality will make you tend to reduce the Bible to a book of doctrines and systematic theology, when in fact 80% of it's story, poem, imagery, and imagination, right?
It's really interesting that you bring that up, though, because, and I'm sorry to interrupt again, but I'm going to interrupt you like crazy. That's just what I do. Whenever you were talking about, you had that sort of negative impact, like you were looking at it from a worldview perspective instead of the person. And I thought that was really interesting, because I know, like Cherry and I, when we have our conversations, a lot of times we have encountered that person of Jesus Christ in our life, even though we might have been in this. Maybe you're in a church where the doctrine is incorrect, or maybe you're in this place where your eschatology is not quite right or whatever. But you've had this moment with the person, you've begun discipleship. You don't have all of the answers, but you have the relationship. And then as you become a disciple and you study more and more and more, then you start getting into like, oh, well, this is a different kind of a worldview. We're not polishing brass on a sinking ship. We're marching the kingdom. And then you start to lose touch. You feel like you're losing touch with the relationship that you once had. It's weird. Yes. It's such a strange dichotomy. And so I've started backing off some. Like, I'm definitely going to study, but I feel the same way that you did. Like, you start becoming very in tune with the fact, like, hey, I don't want to lose this relationship here. That's where I'm safe. That's where I'm sufficient,
Yeah. Now, this will all come into play later when we talk about the more theological distinctives of preterism and such. But nevertheless, understanding how imagination integrates with faith, And this doesn't mean I reject rationality. I still love reading philosophy and stuff. So I'm like, it's just recognizing those imbalances and getting more balance throughout life, and also learning to explore different aspects of faith. Some people are just stuck in their one element of faith, and they think they're proud of the fact that they've never changed their minds on any theology. They think that sort of makes them right. And I'm thinking, boy, you're the biggest fool of all, because I've changed my theology in significant, like 180 degrees on some things.
I've had people say God never changes. And it's like, well, I know God doesn't change, but
your understanding
should be.
Does, yeah.
You should be. Like you're not God, But anyway, sorry about that.
Yeah, and so there's that element of it. But also then I eventually, basically through that, I feel like I started my journey, which I feel like now I'm at the height of it, but it took decades, but I began the journey of that integration of faith and imagination and my art. But what happened was then I finally understood, I finally had a sense of rootedness in something eternal. In other words, because I was part of the kingdom of God, a higher cause, the something higher than myself, then my art became an expression of that, and an expression of truth still, but it's the truth now that I find in something that's eternal, and I have meaning and purpose in everything I do. And even though I'm long dead, in fact, I don't care when I'm dead and long gone, my reward will not be, are they going to worship? Are they going to study me when I'm dead? My reward will be, I did this for God and His kingdom, and well done, thou good and faithful servant. And that's why I do it. And so be it. Whatever happens in the results doesn't matter. So that's how I found that meaning and purpose in facing death that I never had. And then in college, actually, I met the woman who would become my wife 6 years later. But my wife Kim, and so that's roughly my Christian testimony. And of course, since that time, as I've lived out that faith, the truth is I've still lapsed into the desire for fame. I still sometimes wish I get more credit for my work. And so having found that meaning, having found that purpose, having been forgiven, doesn't mean I'm not still a sinner, or that I'm actually probably the worst person I know, and so I'm a very selfish person. And if it weren't for the grace of God and my wonderful wife, who embodies the grace of God more than anything I've ever seen, I wouldn't have much of a chance on this earth for sure. But the message, Christ doesn't perfect you, doesn't give you perfection. He doesn't make everything all right, because we've had a lot of suffering in our life as well. Minimal compared to most people, I would say, but still we've had our suffering, and Christ doesn't make everything work out perfect in the way you want and all that. But you find the meaning and purpose through the suffering, through the longing, through the pursuit of Him is really, it's funny. I'm not a mystic, but I've certainly seen some of the resonances of that in my later years of life, understanding this notion of how God can be so silent and yet still be there in the silence, which of course reminds you of the prophet Elijah, right? Yep. So there's a lot of those elements having to do with imagination. So I had that turn, what they call the postmodern turn, where I realized, and actually I discovered, but I didn't become a postmodernist, but I had that turn when I realized the limits of reason and the limits of that whole pursuit of truth from an intellectual standpoint. Yes, it's legitimate, but it doesn't cover everything. And there's a lot that the imagination can actually cover and connect with in a way that reason cannot. And so my stories are that combination of both of those things. And at least I seek to make them that way, where incarnation is what I call it. I tell stories where I seek to incarnate the truth rather than preach it or something like that. And that's the Word made flesh. That's the perfect link of the Logos and the Imagos. Day. So.
I think that's interesting that you say seek, and then you say a lot of things about what searching for. I hear that from a lot of Catholics when you were talking about earlier, where you didn't see things. You're looking for God. In the Catholic Church, we're taught you go through the priest. Everything goes through the priest, and then at a certain point, you get some kind of awakening, or you go seeking, like you did. And I think that's a good message for everyone out there, whether you're Christian or Catholic or whatever religion, is to actually do what you're talking about, and that is to seek and to go find God, and then you will start getting your understanding, and your understanding will change as you grow and mature in the Lord.
Yeah.
That's definitely the thing that I've noticed. We've been doing testimonies for almost a year now, and every one of them are exactly the same in this. You all start from a starting point, you grow, you learn, you continue to grow, and then you reach this place, whatever this place might be, but it never actually ends, I guess, until we put this earthly tent in the dirt. That's the idea, is that we're going to continue to grow, and we need to change. So anyway.
It's like a series on TV. The end. There's an end to the episode. There's a beginning, middle, and end, but the series still is going to go on, right?
Yeah, you got to get to the next.
And that's definitely
season.
how I see it.
Yes.
Well, speaking of that, so you had this Christian awakening, and you started seeking God, and you got the awareness. When did you make the turn to preterism?
Well, in college. So I'm in college, and actually everything starts there in a real way, because that's when I really started pursuing truth of the Bible and studying it and theology and all that kind of stuff, and philosophy. That's when I actually first started learning about philosophy and what was I going to say? So there's several things that are occurring at the same time, and one of those is the theological pursuits as well as the artistic pursuits, So I start going, I was a visual artist, I was graphic design type of thing, illustration. But I always loved movies, but understanding the worldview then allowed me to, I started watching movies and started seeing the worldviews that I didn't see before. And I started seeing how powerful it is. And mostly, a lot of the movies were pretty secular and pretty much not positive towards Christian faith type of thing. But I saw how powerful they were to emotionally move people. And I would go and I would cry at movies, because I would be crying because I would be seeing how powerful it is and how much I desired God's word, God's kingdom, God's truths to be communicated through stories like that. And that's what began my desire to get into movies. But it would take many years before I could actually become a screenwriter, because the solitude of a writer's life was definitely not for me. I was too lonely until I got married. Then I was able to handle the solitude, because I had my wife. And so that began, but also the theological pursuit, which was pretty dramatic in many ways. But so that artistic imagination, understanding, seeing the scriptures, not in terms, when we read, a lot of times when modern day American Christians read the Bible, we just tend to read it literally, and particularly prophecy, the sky rolls up like a scroll. Well, that's gotta be the Big Bang reversal or whatever, and so
we read it like a newspaper.
Yeah, read like a newspaper, but then I don't even remember who I came into contact with. I don't even remember who it was, but he gave me, he was talking about this preterism thing, and I just thought it was heresy, literally at first, because it's like, what? We have nothing to look forward to. You're saying, did Christ already come? And of course, I'm a partial preterist, so I still believe there's that future element. But there's still, when you first hear it, Christ came on the clouds, you're assuming that means he already came, and that means, there's nothing else to look forward to, and there's no Antichrist and all this stuff, and I had been raised
Darn it, there's no tribulation. Dang.
Yeah, there's no Antichrist. Darn it, I wanted to go. Yeah. So I had been, I had learned, read Hal Lindsey, who was like one of the earlier...
the late, great Planet Earth.
Yeah, late, great Planet Earth, baby.
You can buy it for a nickel.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, go on YouTube now. And you can find the movie, and you got to watch it, because it just shows you how all these futuristic Christian prophecies, how completely out of date they are. Of course, now they think they're not. But if you look at that, you see, look, he used the same Bible passages you did. He made the same links to from the newspaper to the Bible that you did, just different interpretations, but it's the same assurance that you have.
Yep.
And he was so completely wrong that he's literally a false prophet. And so now how do you think about that, when you're making the same kinds of projections, right?
Well, they all are. Anyway, they all are. Let's just be real.
Yeah, they are.
They're all false prophets. They're all getting it wrong. And so I agree with you on that one. I really do.
Yeah. And this isn't just it's not just theological. It's just not just my eschatology, judging other eschatologies. At that time, I was even over the years, I was bothered by it. Like I would look at that and realize, even in that time period, Christ was supposed to come by 1988 because of the whole Israel became a nation in 48 and all this stuff, and all these prophecies kept not happening, and it just bothered me. And I started thinking, maybe there's something to the fact that if they're always wrong, and of course, I heard even before him there were the same kind of prognostications. If that viewpoint, that premillennial and whatever, is always wrong, maybe it's not the individual interpretations that are wrong. Maybe it's the system, And that's what enabled me to at least be more open to preterism. But the thing that drew me in was actually, Gary DeMar's books were very influential, and his appeal to the imagery of the Old Testament prophets is the basis or foundation of the New Testament prophetic images. So when you see Christ coming on clouds, well, obviously that's Jesus surfing in on a cumulus nimbus. It has to be, obviously, right?
I think it's a stratus, but nice try.
Yeah, and well, no, actually not. And if you look back in the Old Testament, when you see that this notion of Yahweh coming on the clouds to judge cities, nations, and tribes. And then it becomes clear, this is a common imagery, as well as all the collapsing universe imagery, the stars fall and all this. They're used in the Old Testament to refer to very specifically historic instances that we know already happened. And so clearly the most biblical approach is understanding in those terms. Now, when I first started Matthew 24, the first part of Matthew 24 was easier to understand that, I could see how that could be fulfilled in the first century. But when you got to that coming on the clouds, that was the hardest thing for me. It took a while before I was able to give up.
Yeah, the sun will be darkened, and
and coming on the clouds, it took a while before I just started realizing, no, actually nowadays, I think that's the easiest thing to prove because of the fact that it's so rooted in clear Old Testament imagery that you just have to give up this notion that that's something in our future that it was applied to the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. But it took a while, and it took a few years probably. And, at the same time, and part of the reason why I became open to it as well was because of my interest in apologetics. I was introduced to Greg Bonson, and I started listening to his stuff, and it was just powerful, and it just blew away everything else I had heard. And I started learning about presuppositionalism and such, but just the nature of his argumentation and his
Bonson was a contemporary of Gary DeMar, actually, right?
Yes, he influenced Gary.
That's right.
And so he also was a preterist. And so that's why because I trusted him, I was willing to read his stuff and listen to him, because I realized a lot of times it takes us, we don't trust these other people that we think are bad people, but if someone that we respect starts to say the same thing, then we consider it. You know what I mean?
That's right.
So that was sort of the opening. But it was, my point is that all that imagination, that imagery that I thought was literal, but no, it's poetic, symbolic imagery, and it's beautiful. And that's why, but I'd always been afraid of Revelation. It even wasn't up until a couple of years ago that I just sort of stayed away from Revelation because it seemed so complex. And I just, And I would have a basic preterist understanding of it, but I still wasn't sure, until I went through Ken Gentry's commentary on Revelation, and I had to do that for my novel series, and it's not available yet. Which one?
No, I was going to say, how did you get that? Because it's not out yet.
I'm good friends with him.
Good grief!
In fact,
are you kidding me right now?
I've designed a lot of his book covers.
Really, I've got his Revelation Made Easy, and inside that book, it talks about this. And by the way, that book was put out like 12 years ago, so he's kind of like the George R.R. Martin of the Christian world.
Yeah, but who as a Christian has left Revelation alone? I don't know very many people that have picked that up and said, hey, let's just jump into this.
I know, but Gentry's been talking about this for a while.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I read Chilton's a while ago, and that helped. That made some sense, but he was a little loosey-goosey, and I do love Ken's very analytical and very detailed and organized approach to answering everything.
Yeah.
I don't always agree with them, but I do appreciate that. So now I had a preterist view of it, but I just didn't have enough knowledge of all the details. But when I read through his commentary, then I got it. And then I'm like, okay, now I get it. And now I'm solid. And now I'm more confident. But I mean, the truth is I'm never absolute in my confidence, especially when it comes to something like that. So I'm always open to, listen to other views.
I just realized something. This is a callback, but do you remember how I told you, I kind of joked about the Neronic persecution?
Yeah.
Now I know why. You're a Gentry fan. And Gentry's before Jerusalem fell. He was he's really like the authority when it comes to the early date, is Ken Gentry. So now I know where you got it from.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. He was a big, huge influence on me.
Well, you should send him a message, please, that he is in Greenville. We are in Hendersonville. We are 45 minutes from him. He should come up and be on our show. You should tell him.
Okay.
We want him on the show. I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of Ken Gentry.
Oh, I'd love to. I'm sure he will.
Shameless plug.
Every time you bring somebody else on and they start talking, I'm taking notes of all of the books they've read, all of the people that they influence, and the Gentry comes up all the time.
Consistently.
Yeah, interestingly, so I got to say, he, like I told you, what I like about him is that but in some ways, the one that I enjoy reading the most, like he's the best for really in-depth study, but the one I enjoy reading the most is Gary DeMar. He's the best writer.
Yeah.
Because like he
paints a picture.
Madness was, but he writes in a way that's very flowing, conversational, but he's very scholarly. So it's not like he's, just writing Christian life type stuff by any means.
Yeah.
But that Last Days Madness was forever. I mean, it's still the one I recommend to anybody for the best introduction to partial preterism. So,
it's fantastic.
And he's just a great writer, Ken is more of an academic writer, and Gary's more of a scholarly, but
he's an artist.
Artist, yeah, he has a sense of art to his writing, absolutely. So.
Yeah, we were very happy. He actually came to the studio and met with us here and shared his testimony, and we really like Gary. He's a very nice guy.
Yeah,
it sounds to me like, and I'm asking him more a question, that you've been drawn to preterism because it answers some outstanding questions you weren't getting from some other sources.
Yes, and also I've always had a curiosity of history, and I'm not a history buff per se, but I love things like philosophy, history. I do love scholarly work and stuff, and scholarly concepts, and I'm drawn to that. And one of the reasons why I was drawn into the preterist writings is because they were talking about this time period that I had never heard anything about, from the end of Book of Acts, right, to AD 70. And they were just describing all this historical stuff, and they were showing, and here's how it fulfills the scripture. And so to me, it was the most biblical approach I'd ever read, because I mean, other views are just speculative, Gog is Russia or whatever, and it's like, well, what, but the way preterists are, it's like, well, here's how it was. Here's the passage. Here's how it was used in the Old Testament. See how then it could be applied to the New Testament. Oh, and here's what Josephus said actually happened. And so all that historical and biblical, it was the most biblical and most historically oriented writing. And so it was the scholarship angle that really sort of sucked me in at first. And even though I was disagreeing with it, it's like, but it's so fascinating. And I'm learning a lot about the history of this time period. And this destruction of the temple is fascinating. I didn't know anything about it,
Yeah, I just read, I can't remember who did it. Somebody is actually, we've said inside this room, and Andy will remember this too. We've talked about this many times. We'd say the prophecy was so good, it's almost like it happened. And then after the fact, they wrote it as if they wrote it before, and they were so spot on. Well, Lucian in history, there is a belief that Lucian actually wrote primarily most of the New Testament, and that he used Josephus as his background. And this was written, in the mid 70s to the early 80 AD, and that this was looking at. Have you heard this before, Brian?
No.
Oh man, I'll have to send it to you. It's really fascinating. It's probably complete, heresy, but whatever. It's something out there that it's kind of going like what we said. Like, it was so perfect. It's almost like the guy read Josephus, then he wrote the Bible. It's pretty wild.
Anti-preterists are always like, watch out, the preterists are always going to bring up that Josephus,
Yeah.
And,
Well, you can use Tacitus. You can use Giuseppon if you'd like.
Well, interestingly, I had known about Josephus, of course, and I've read pieces of him. But whenever I tried to read him, he's just so dry and boring that it was always so hard to just actually read him over the years.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. This is one of the reasons why I'm so grateful that I'm able to write books about things I want to write about and I'm interested in, because it allows me to dig deeper. And when I'm writing a story, I can read boring histories that I could not read on my own, because I'm looking for the story and I'm looking for specifically
Yeah, you're doing
how
the
it can
research.
work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Same
and
here.
So research
Same here.
allows me to focus in a way that I never. So going through all of Josephus was fascinating in helping me to tell my story in Chronicles of the Apocalypse.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't want time to get away from us. There's a few things that I definitely want to know about you before we get to the end of this episode. And that being, could you tell us that when did you get into writing? Like, what was your first book? What made you decide to become an author?
Yeah, well, I've always been a visual artist. Like I said, that's what I was trained in. But when I started getting interested in movies, actually, I loved in college. I loved doing street drama, evangelistic street drama, and of course, you have to write. You have to write your own, and it's fun. It's fun to play the characters and stuff. But I realized I had to write my own skits because I had a burning desire to communicate something to people. And so I had to write my own. And that's when I learned that, okay, it's the writer that really is the originator of ultimately of the theme or content or meaning, that kind of thing. And so when I got interested in movies and realized, what can I do for movies? Well, the one thing you could do that you didn't have to be a starving artist or, didn't have to go to Hollywood, didn't have to get a crew of people to help you direct it, right, is writing. You could write a script and sell it from anywhere, right? And so that allowed me to pursue my normal life, but then pursue the writing on the side. And it took me many years, like 10 years before my first movie was made.
Writing's a lot of discipline too. It really is.
Can you tell us what that movie was?
What
was the first movie?
To End All Wars in 2001.
And that's the Robert Carlyle and Kiefer Sutherland film.
That's a good movie.
Wow.
Yeah, so I had a career in screenwriting first, and that's always been my passion. And even to this day, I love movies more than anything. I really do, and I'd love to be able to make movies, but it's almost impossible, and it's really hard to make a living at it anyway. But I was able to, fortunately, over those years.
Boy, howdy.
Well, the nice thing about that movie,
I said, boy, howdy. I've done some, small Christian films, and I actually have profited on both of my films, but I didn't. They were all limited release. Nothing big. Yeah. Didn't have no Kiefer Sutherland in it.
Well, the nice thing about that movie, and then I've read about two of his other ones. I've read about them. They're movies that make you kind of think.
Yeah.
You come away with a message, and you have to think about how you're going to interpret that.
Yeah. So it's better than Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
I'm trying to recall the words, but
actually, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is very meaningful.
I know. I'm just kidding. It was a joke. I was just trying to find a way to slam Ralph, and it just blew up in my own face. Jeez. Sorry to interrupt you, though. So you got into screenwriting. You've written this film, and
over the years, it was tough, and I had some down years, and that's normal for everybody, but. In one, particularly, I had a couple of bad years where I made almost nothing, and I just realized I've got to expand my horizons here. I got got to reinvent myself a little bit. And what other thing can I do? I started considering maybe I could try to write a low budget movie that I could direct, but also I realized, well, maybe I should start writing novels. I used to think, it's not like I've never wanted to write novels. Okay. It's a way for me to tell a story that I can do. But some novel writers, like it's the thing they wanted to do more than anything. And for me, it wasn't. It was more means to an end. But I read a lot of books and a lot of novels when I was a kid. So I loved them, but it just wasn't the first thing on my list. Right. And so, but what happened was, around 2010, 11, was that it? Yeah. I started to, so I came up with this great idea. I wanted to get a movie that Hollywood would love and, also religious Bible believers or whatever could love too. And I came up with a great story that hadn't really been done this way. And I realized that there was an odd angle to it that would be so cool for like I said, the Hollywood movie as well as the Bible audience. And that was a story about Noah. And I had discovered in my research for it, Michael Heiser. And this was when he was first writing The Unseen Realm. It was not called The Unseen Realm, but it was free online because he's just a nobody scholar,
It's the Naked Bible podcast, and it's fantastic. Yeah. And everybody needs to pray for him because he is battling cancer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So anyway, it was his work that helped me open up this doorway to this phenomenal imagination, but story thread line in the Bible that I had not understood before. Of course, it's connected to the Nephilim, the giants, and it began with that Genesis 6, 1-4 bizarre passage that was the most bizarre passage in the Bible that I just looked over and said, I don't understand that. Maybe one day God will explain it, but I still believe the Bible. I just don't have to understand everything. Well, when he started explaining that, I started seeing the storyline throughout the whole Bible. And I thought, man, this is phenomenal. This would make a great movie. No one's ever done this before, right? So I write this script up and I've got the Nephilim and I've got Watchers and all this kind of stuff. And then I heard, Darren Aronofsky was making a Noah movie. And I just sank because, I was a nobody and you could get a script sold as a nobody, but it's really almost impossible. So I just realized at that point, okay, I'm not going to get this made. He's going to get it made. And I thought, well, how can I get my story out before his so mine doesn't seem derivative? And I thought, well, I guess now's the time to write the novel. So that's what inspired me to go ahead and write the novel based on the script. And then that was Noah Primeval. And then that became the beginning of my novel career, where I've been writing like two books or two novels a year since then. And when I did that book, Kindle was just on the crest of beginning to be really popular, and it started selling a lot. And I thought, I can make money this way because I'm not making money with movies right now. So I just invested into it. I was still pursuing movies, but I started investing into writing the novels, and then that became my novel writing career. And then eventually that became a very good living that I'm doing now full time, and I still do movies on the side. In fact, this last week, I just released a movie called My Son Hunter, which is about
I've
Hunter
seen
Biden's
that on
laptop.
Twitter. That looks so good.
Yeah, it's about Hunter Biden's laptop, and it's a dark political satire, very Hollywoodish in that sense. And it's a bit raunchy, but it's
so is the laptop, dude.
Yeah, exactly. But there's no nudity, but there's everything else. Okay. So,
like every good Christian writer should.
Oh my gosh. Exactly. If you could see some of the things Rick's been doing during this podcast.
Glad we turned his camera off.
Honey.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so I'm still doing it, but it's more my hobby. Writing novels used to be the hobby, but now the movies are the hobby on the side. I don't need to make them, which also allows me to pick and choose. I don't have to do something if I don't want to do it anymore, which is great because it's just the time and energy you have to put in. And the writer is a low man on the totem pole. And so it's also the humiliation of that sort of position where you get kicked around. You get pushed around by the people above you. Make this change, make that change. And sometimes they're okay changes, but a lot of times they're not good changes, but you got to make them anyway.
Was that the movie with Gina Carano too? Was that Gina Carano?
Yeah, she's in it.
Was this through the Daily Wire?
Yes, the Daily Wire. Ben Shapiro.
Ben Shapiro?
Mm-hmm. No.
Oh, it's not.
This is with it's being released. You got to go to mysonhunter.com to get the movie. It's only online, and it is released technically through Breitbart.com, but you can get the movie online by going to mysonhunter.com. And but yeah, I'm familiar with what Daily Wire is doing, and I that's what I'd love to be a part of now, is that world. We call it the parallel economy, where so the whole other side of the equation that I didn't explain was, right around 2019, Hollywood went full woke, and I consider Hollywood to be dead now. Hollywood went full woke, where they were, of course, they've always been woke and leftist, and I've always had to be careful.
What would you call Breitbart? Unwoke and rightist?
Yeah, just right down the middle and plain spoken. Certainly. Yeah. No agenda there.
We're not busting your chops.
When you go so far left, you're right.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Anyway.
Well, the truth is, when Breitbart started, I met Andrew Breitbart, and it was a lot better than I think that it is now. But nevertheless, so Hollywood went full woke, and they started saying in the magazines and online and such, executives were just saying, we're not gonna hire white middle-aged men, and you're just like, wow.
And ever since then, there's not been one in any of the movies I've seen. They've cleared them right out.
Yeah,
cleared them right out.
Meet Andy Bishop, our resident atheist and liberal. Feel free to speak up as much as you want.
Our resident white middle-aged.
Actually, if you watch, a dominant number of the movies now are women leads, and there's a lot more people of color in the movies, which I have no problem with. I know, that's exactly what I say. So what? But the point is as there's a problem with all affirmative action, right? I mean, when you're literally, it's racist.
Clearly, it's affirmative action because you can't write about women or people of color. So it must be that they're just throwing these people into roles they don't belong in.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, I know some black guys back there who they're doing really well now, because that's what they're looking for. We want people of color and trans and gay and all that kind of stuff. And so the reality was, in that world, there's, I had always had to fly under the radar anyway, because as a white male Christian conservative, I was literally Satan to Hollywood.
Yeah.
And so you had to be very careful. I've had people, when they find out we're Christians and conservatives, that quit working with us and stuff. So I've experienced that stuff, but then I knew, okay, now it's really over, because I'm just a little guy working more in the independent side anyway. So I
don't mean to interrupt you, but I do want to make mention of this. Let's talk about Hollywood for just a second and what has happened. If you remember, there was a time in Hollywood where Cecil DeMille and the Ten Commandments and Christian Stories and Samson and Delilah, and that was a big thing in Hollywood. And especially that was on, I'm sorry to bring the Jews in, but let's just be real. The ones that were in control of Hollywood, they were very much into the moral side of the story. And then over time, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, things sort of got away from it. And so...
follow the money.
Well, yeah, but now it seems like... So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, yes, I think morally speaking that Hollywood they were really concerned about it on screen, not so much behind screen, right? They were more on screen that way. And then as time goes on, then it doesn't matter what's on screen so much, and they want to hide what's behind screen, still, I continue to do that. Anyway, I don't mean to interrupt you. And I have to make sure that we got to roll this in, because we're just a couple minutes over, and I want to be sure that we wrap this up in the correct way. So,
well, that's what launched me to move to Texas and free myself from the bondage of oppression. Yes, I was intersectionally oppressed in Hollywood. I know it's outrageous to think, but the truth is it was just, everything just kind of came together. And I thought, you know what? I want to focus more on my novels anyway, because it's the story I want to tell. And even the people I've worked with who I liked, you end up telling their stories for them, and that's okay. I'm a team member, and I make it work, as I did with my son Hunter and such. But there's something about when you get your own story out there the way you want it. So that was very fulfilling. For instance, I had written a script about Jezebel for this team of guys, and it was one of the best scripts I wrote, and it was really timely and perfect and all that. And it starred a woman, so that's okay.
But she was a whore.
Yeah, Jezebel.
Yeah,
she was a mean old whore.
No, she wasn't.
I know,
she
I'm
was
just
a
kidding.
Queen, and it was the patriarchal fascists of the Jews who were bad. But
I'm just messing.
But I got the rights to do the novel because there was a whole nother element of it that I couldn't put in there in the movie. And so I wrote the novel of it, and that was my version. And I don't care if they ever make the movie, because my version got out there, and I feel satisfied with that, because as a storyteller, that's the satisfaction you get is your story out there and people are reading it and such. And
sure.
And, so that's where I am now.
Well, Brian, will you tell our audience how that they can find your stuff? So we already sort of mentioned it, but you mentioned Kindle. So I'm assuming that your books, you can find them on Amazon. You can find them on...
everything is exclusively on Amazon. Most all my books are in paperback, ebook, or audiobook. And there's several series. I'm the only Godawa, probably. I think I'm probably the only Godawa on Amazon. So just type in my name and you'll find all the series and stuff. And
Brian Godawa, Godawa, Godawa.
Yes.
And your website's godawa.com?
Yes.
Yeah, so go to godawa.com and you can see, I went on your site today and you were able to see all of the books. You were able to see all of
and there are links
films,
for everything
links
there.
for everything there. Yep, you can go onto Wikipedia, even look up Brian Godawa, and he's got all of the ISBNs for all of his books that you can click and get to. So, Brian, it means a lot that you actually were on the show. I really appreciate you sharing your testimony and making sure.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
hey, thanks for being around.
Yeah, it was really nice of you to be here, and Bob, tell Bob Cruikshank hi the next time you talk to him.
Will do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Billy, Ralph, any of you guys have any questions you'd like to bring to Brian before we end?
I think I'm good.
Yeah?
I asked mine.
You asked yours, so it's good. All right. All clear. All right. Well, Jerry, Sarita, Andy, Ralph, Billy,
Represent.
and Brian, all of you guys, thanks for being on the show, and we will talk to you guys next time on the Burros of Berea. Hey guys, this is Rick from the Burros of Berea. Do you know how much blood, sweat, and tears it takes to make a podcast? None. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't cost a lot. And so if you guys don't mind, if anybody would like to give to help us with these episodes, it would be great. We'll put out even more content. And if you go to our Patreon page, just search for the Burros of Berea, you'll get extra notes, extra episodes, and it's pretty much free. $1 gets you a lot. Thanks, guys. I think that was Andy's favorite episode.